On the count of 3, 2. Yeah. أعوذ بالله من السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this live interactive session with Professor Father Christopher Paul Clohessy, who is the author of a number of books on Ahlul Bayt and Shia Islam. But today we will be focusing on this particular book which he has authored entitled Fatima, Salamun Alayha, daughter of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, before I give a quick introduction, let me give you the modus operandi of today's live session is that we have also requested Mr. Sayyid Aqil Kazmi, who is a very well-renowned Marsiya Khan, what we call in Pakistan, to grace the occasion with a mankabat and sozo salam. So may I request Brother Aqil Kazmi to please turn on your webcam, and if you can grace this occasion with mankabat and sozo salam. Aqil bhai, would you please turn on your webcam? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum, Ali bhai.
Alaikum
How are you?
assalam wa
Fine.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ji
All
Aqil bhai,
guests are please listen me. Bibi Fatima to Zahra Salamullah alayhi, the daughter of peace, our Prophet, peace be upon him, Mankabat. Allahumma salli ala
Allahumma
Muhammad.
salli ala Muhammadin wa alayhi Muhammad wa ajil faraj.
عزت خدا کی فاطمہ بنت نبی بطول ہیں عزت خدا کی فاطمہ بنت نبی بطول ہیں وہ جس کے احترام میں وہ جس کے احترام میں در پر کھڑے رسول ہیں بنت نبی بطول ہیں عزت خدا کی فاطمہ بنت نبی بطول ہیں سجدے کرے ہزار تو دل میں ہو بغض فاطمہ دل میں ہو بغض فاطمہ جنت میں تو بھی جائے گا یہ سوچنا فضول ہے وہ جس کے احترام میں در پہ کھڑے رسول ہیں بنت نبی بطول ہیں عزت خدا کی فاطمہ بنت نبی بطول ہیں ہر شہد و جہان کی ان کو جہیز میں ملی ان کو جہیز میں ملی مجھ کو قسم خدا کی فداک ان کے قدم کی دھول ہے وہ جس کے احترام میں در پہ کھڑے رسول ہیں، بنت نبی بطول ہیں، عزت خدا کی فاطمہ بنت نبی بطول ہیں، ہے جو بنا لا الہ خیر النساء کا لال ہے، خیر النساء کا لال ہے، جس کے لیے نبی دیا سجدے کو رہن طول ہے، وہ جس کے احترام میں در پہ کھڑے رسول ہیں، بنت نبی بطول ہیں، عزت خدا کی فاطمہ بنت نبی بطول ہیں، بدرو احد سے یوں بھی ہے بالا مباہلا، بدرو احد سے یوں بھی ہے بالا مباہلا، ارے کرنے چلی ہے فاطمہ زہرا مباہلا، کرنے چلی ہے فاطمہ زہرا مباہلا، اور اسلام ہار جاتا صداقت کی جنگ میں، اسلام ہار جاتا صداقت کی جنگ میں، ارے مل کر بھی کل مدینہ جو کرتا مباہلا، مل کر بھی کل مدینہ جو کرتا مباہلا، کہ کرنے چلی ہے فاطمہ زہرا مباہلا۔ سلام کے دو اشعار۔ زہرا تیرے گلشن کا ہر پھول نرالا ہے، زہرا تیرے گلشن کا ہر پھول نرالا ہے، ہر پھول نے سر دے کے اسلام کو پالا ہے، زہرا تیرے گلشن کا ہر پھول نرالا ہے، ہر پھول نے سر دے کے اسلام کو پالا ہے، زہرا تیرے گلشن کا ہر پھول نرالا ہے، بس قبر ہی زہرا کی ڈوبی ہے اندھیروں میں، بس قبر ہی زہرا کی ڈوبی ہے اندھیروں میں، हालांकि मदीने में हर सिमत उजाला है, हर फूल ने सर दे के इस्लाम को पाला है, ज़हरा तेरे गुलशन का हर फूल निराला है, हर फूल निराला है, हर फूल निराला है। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद। Thank you very much, Ali Jafri sahab. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Akil Kazmi Saab. And once again, we request the participants to offer salutations. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. And this was Akil Kazmi, who has beautifully recited. And those of you who are not aware of this cultural aspect of how we commence the sessions of such spiritual sessions is we request one of the brothers based on the session or sisters to recite salutations and the stanzas and the poems pertinent to Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, the family of Prophet Muhammad. And this is what Akil Kazmi was doing today, particularly for Hazrat Fatima Salamun Alayha. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and with note of thanks, especially to Professor Father Christopher Clohessy, as we have taken just 5 to 6 minutes extra to commence this session with the recitation of Bibi Salamun Alayha. But let me quickly once again share the introduction of Professor Father Clohessy. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are honored to have Professor Christopher Paul Clohessy with us to deliver this live session on the book which he has authored, Fatima Islamullah, daughter of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A quick introduction about the professor. Professor Father Christopher Paul Clohessy is a South African-born Roman Catholic priest and a professor of Shia Islamic Studies at the Pontifical Institute for Arabic and Islamic Studies in Rome. He's the author of Angels Hastening the Karbala Dreams, which was recently published by Gorgias Press in 2021. Another book, Half of My Heart, The Narratives of Bibi Zainab Salamun Alayha, daughter of Imam Ali alayhi Islam, by Gorgias Press in 2018. We already did one live session on the topic of Bibi Zainab Salamun Alayha with Father Clohessy. And today we are again honored to have him to deliver a keynote on pertinent to the book which he has authored on Bibi Fatima Salamun Alayha, daughter of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Gorgias Press, which he authored in 2017. Interestingly, he's currently in the process of compiling the primary text on Hazrat Abbas alayhi Islam to eventually publish a new book, which I understand. Is that correct, Father Clohessy?
Is correct.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Now, without further any delays, let me stop my screen and give the mic to Father Clohessy so he can formally proceed with his keynote speech. And folks, we'll open the session after his speech for any question answers that you have, just to make it a bit interactive experience for all of us. So without further delays, over to you, Father Clohessy.
Many thanks, and thank you for that prayerful introduction. I would say precisely about Lady Fatima what I would say about Ali bin Abi Talib or Al-Hassan or Al-Hussein or the Lady Zainab. In fact, what I would say about all of the core members of the Ahl al-Bayt, that they ought to be, on our part, an ongoing contemporary attempt to examine the life of Lady Fatima from new angles, from fresh angles, searching, if you like, for what I have come to call the hermeneutical keys, that is, the keys for interpreting, the interpretive keys by which we could unlock greater depths, not just in the theology that encases her suffering, her stand for justice after the death of her father, the Prophet, but also theology that we find in the facets of her ordinary everyday life. After all, we have to admit that it is quite a difficult thing to hold the Lady Fatima up and propose her to contemporary society as a model. She is, after all, the only surviving daughter of the Prophet of Islam. She is, as the hadith calls her, pbuh, the mother of her father. And so in a sense, she carries within her blood, carries within herself the whole line of imams. She is protected and cloaked by the quality of isma, however you choose to translate that theological principle as impeccability or infallibility or sinlessness. She is the mistress of the woman of the worlds. She is the Virgin Mother, grieving the injustices done against the house of sorrows, Beit al-Ahzan, over which she presides. And she is a powerful intercessor on the day of reckoning when accounts will be paid. These qualities together would make it impossible for any contemporary believer to match or imitate her life. So I submit that we need to dig deeper, beyond all of the customary things which we habitually say about her because they are true, things that we can take now as a given, and attempt for ourselves to unearth, let's call it a Fatimid praxis. I mean, an attempt to represent her life, to repropose her life to the world in a manner that makes possible an authentic emulation, so that without in any way diminishing the qualities we've already taken now as given, would put her within the reach of ordinary men and women, no matter what their religious conviction. People who are not engaged in the same struggle for justice in which she was engaged in her last days and weeks. People who are not necessarily living lives that are filled with sorrow, but whose engagement with daily life may be entirely given over to more ordinary things, more mundane things, but people, and we should never underestimate this, people who suffer a genuine and authentic martyrdom every day because they try to make the correct moral decisions, the correct ethical decisions, both in public and when they are unobserved in private. Decisions in their marriages and their relationships, in their families, in their workplaces or places of education, decisions that they make and are often go unrewarded. In fact, quite often bring an increase in the levels of suffering that must be borne. Now, notwithstanding the undeniable amount of devotion to Lady Fatima in the Shia Islamic world and the theology and the spirituality that has been justifiably constructed around her life, I think it is crucial that such an exceptional model of integrity, of non-accommodation with injustice or with discrimination, I think it is crucial that such a model be introduced to the widest possible audience in contemporary times. There may be untold devotion to the Lady Fatima within the confines of Shia Islamic faith, but I would suggest that the key to understanding her life and her sacrifice for a wider audience is not necessarily a religious key or even a political key, not a key that is confined or restricted to one particular faith family, or even to one particular worldview or one particular nation, but rather that hermeneutical key by which we could unlock elements of her life, the mystery of her personality, is primarily, without in any way diminishing her quality of isma, a human key. There are, of course, in the life of Lady Fatima some gaps in her biography, as there are gaps in the biographies of her sons Al-Hassan and Hussein, things that were not necessarily recorded and so that we don't know well, things concerning her early life, about which we have not many details. And those biographical gaps quite often lead to myth, that is, to people who pad them with stories or with accounts of pious things said and done. Now, that's not a bad thing in itself, because myth is not a bad thing. Myth is always constructed around some element of truth, and the meanings of myth, the interpretations of myth, tend to be modified from generation to generation. The danger with myth is that it easily becomes a place where people build golden calves for themselves, where they create theologies and spiritualities that are so great that they transcend all boundaries and make the person entirely unreachable, impossible to imitate in any way. Now, of course, in some cases, this has been the result of bad scholarship. But bad scholarship should not ever be met with condemnation. It should always and only be met with better scholarship. For me, the key point about Lady Fatima is that she's not inaccessible at all. This was the point I tried to make in the book that I wrote about her. Not one who can't be imitated by ordinary, everyday people. Not only is she not inaccessible, but also she is not accessible only to one religious family or even just to religious people in general. Fatima is quite clearly, and this should be obvious to all of us now, one of those exceptionally rare people who causes others to stop in their tracks for a moment from all their self-interest and their selfishness, and to ask who this woman is who lived her life so unselfishly, lived her life with such a profound level of integrity and of courage and of valor, one of those startling personalities who really does cause us to turn around and to face ourselves, to see the difference between who we like to think we are and who we really are. One of those people who forces us to ask whether our own lives, whatever amount of valor or integrity or courage may be present, whether our own lives are adding any quality at all to the lives of the people around us. Personalities like Fatima don't just happen. Personalities like Fatima are a divine gift, and God surely raises up in every generation these models of humanity, models of virtues that are not religious virtues, not male virtues or female virtues, just human virtues that could be embraced by anybody. Now, the two virtues that seem to me to dominate the life of Lady Fatima amidst all the others, the virtues that seem to me to infuse her speech, her actions, her choices, are the virtues of integrity and the virtue of gratitude. Integrity, it is in itself not a religious virtue. Integrity is a human virtue. If you want to experience genuine inner peace, not world peace, that's another thing, but genuine inner tranquility, you have to live with integrity. People who experience a genuine inner serenity don't have it because their lives have suddenly become problem-free. They have it because they live with a certain measure of integrity. People who live with integrity don't lie awake at night worrying about how to cover their tracks, thinking up excuses for all the things they've done or failed to do, wondering how they're going to hide all their mistakes. No, if you want a real inner serenity, you have to live with integrity. If you want wisdom, something our world is rather short of at the moment. We're not short of information. We have plenty of information. We have too much information, but not so much wisdom. But if you want to live with wisdom, you have to live with integrity. Because wise people are always people of integrity, and integrity that is unyielding, that refuses to compromise even for the sake of convenience. People like Lady Fatima, people who are wise, people of integrity, they live as people of their word, people whose promises can be trusted, people who don't have principles. They live by principles. And I think that integrity is the most important of all the virtues, because when a person lives with integrity, when I am in public, exactly as the same as I am in private, when the things I do in public are the same things I do when I'm unobserved, whether people are watching or not, when there's no disparity between my words and my actions, when people live with integrity like that, all the other virtues, justice, truthfulness, fairness, honesty, they all automatically slot into place. If a person is living with genuine integrity, they are already living with all the virtues. And I propose that Lady Fatima is primarily for humanity a superb model or example of integrity. Because there's always going to be stuff in our lives that is in our work, in our families, in our marriages, in our relationships, stuff that's all right to do. And there's always going to be stuff that is emphatically never acceptable. Fatima understood that. when she took the stand that she took after the death of her father. And the instant in which she understood that, a certain inevitable suffering entered into her days. Because to live prophetically doesn't mean predicting the future. It means being willing to tell the truth about the present moment, no matter how painful that truth may be. Fatima understood that. And the moment she stood up and spoke truth, a real persecution began against her. For you and I, integrity might be a little different. It might just be for you and I who don't really live our lives for the most part on the world stage. It might just be the courage to hold on to promises which could so easily be broken, but we choose not to break them. To hold on to truths which we could so easily compromise because it would make our lives so much easier, but still we don't compromise them. To hold on to the commandments of God, which we could easily bend and find excuses for that, but we refuse to bend them. I think that Lady Fatima, for the contemporary audience, she speaks into the lives of the indecisive, the vacillating people, ordinary people like you and I who are faced with moral choices on a daily basis, ethical decisions that have to be made about the words we use, about the sort of language we speak, about the decisions we make, about family and business practices in the schoolroom, in the workplace, in the university, or wherever it is we spend most of our day. Small ethical decisions that can paralyze us. Little stands for justice and morality that are so daunting enough to make us go against the truth sometimes, to go against being honest because we desperately want to be popular and liked by everybody. Just struggling every day with the truth that demands to be told, no matter what the cost. That's what Fatima has become an example of. For Fatima, it wasn't just truths about her husband, truths about succession, truths about her father, not individual or particular truths. Most of us are not interested in individual and particular truths. Most of the world is not looking for individual and particular truths, truths about this or that, religious truths or political truths. There's no shortage of those truths. No, it's the truth that interests people. The truth about who we are, the truth about who God actually is, the truth about how life on here should be lived, the truth about death and what comes after that. That's the truth that is encompassed in the life of Lady Fatima, because that's the truth that most people are looking for. She stands before us as a model of integrity and therefore a woman of profound inner peace and wisdom. And she invites us to embrace the pattern or the outline of Karbala in our own lives, as she did, because you know better than I do that Karbala had already started during the life of Lady Fatima. It had already begun. It was already on its way. It was never intended by God just to be one simple battle at a particular moment of history. It was meant to be always this recurring daily occurrence in which people are invited to choose over and over again to take their stand, a space which people are invited to inhabit and to keep renewing. Fatima had to endure her own Karbala, just as you and I, if we are serious about God and the things of God, have to endure our own Karbala. After all, let's be honest. If God does not exist, then nothing actually matters. What we're doing right now just doesn't matter. But if God does exist, then he is the single most important thing in our lives, the one before whom everything else should fade into obscurity. There's a famous hadith about the son of Al-Hussein, Zayn al-Abidin. Somebody reported that they were watching him praying. And as he was praying, his cloak began to slip off one of his shoulders, so that he was left in a very uncomfortable position, probably cold, but also with a cloak half of his shoulder. But he did nothing about straightening it until the prayer was finished. And when he was asked about that, he said, "Are you aware of the one in front of whom I was standing?" So because we believe in God, we are invited to take the Karbala moments seriously when they come, as did Fatima, to allow God to sketch out for each of us a space in which we as believers can live lives that are constructive, lives that are prolific, lives that add quality and morality to the world around us, lives that have meaning. If you like, and I've said this often enough, Karbala is the pencil that God uses to write onto our hearts the capacity for justice and for courage, to sketch out the space in which he wants us to live. And so if you examine your world as, or I examine my own private world through the prism of Karbala, it makes it possible to step back for a moment and to reassess our lives, even in the worst moments, even in moments of world crisis, even in moments of loss and pain, to assess them as not as futile, not as wasted, not as aimless or without goals, but as decisive, as potentially fruitful. What was ostensibly for Lady Fatima in the last days of her life a resounding defeat as she saw the power taken from her husband was in fact filled with numerous glimpses already of a final victory. And so too, the prism of Karbala, the defeats in our own lives, show forth glimpses of the same. Now, Karbala is the place where injustice and wickedness begin to unravel and fall apart. Why? Because it beckons us to live our lives more intensely, more intense in those daily conversations each of us has with God in our formal and informal prayer, no matter what the shape that conversation takes, but especially more intense in our gratitude. And I think that aside from integrity, gratitude seems to be the dominant virtue in the life of Fatima, because after all, gratitude is the great vaccination, if you like, the great antidote. It's the antidote to our selfishness and our self-centeredness. It's the antidote to our ego. It is the antidote for all of that misery we feel when we just can't get our way, or when what we want is not given to us immediately. It's the antidote for all the unhappiness we feel when we see that other people have all kinds of things we wish we had. It's the antidote for the pain that comes into our lives because we don't have the things that we or the media or social media have insisted we cannot live without. Fatima invites us to live with a more intense and profound gratitude to God. And we do that by living more engaged with matters of truth, matters of justice. Fatima invites us to stand with such profound sadness before every single instance of godlessness or wickedness or injustice, a sadness that doesn't just leave as an emotion, but goads us and drives us into living better lives ourselves, drives us into doing what is right. Fatima becomes, in a sense, an orientation, a way of walking through life, because she invites us to remember that we are meant, by the way we live, to be an ongoing reproach to the tyrants of our day, as Lady Fatima was a reproach to the tyrants of her day. And remember that tyrants are not only found in politics or in school playgrounds, they are found in marriages, they are found in places of worship, in places of work, in families, in relationships, in schools, in universities. And we are invited, by the way we choose to live, to be a reproach to their every word and action, as Lady Fatima was a reproach to the tyrants of her day. Tyrants are the people, wherever you find them, who have convinced themselves that they can use force or pressure or violence or wealth or weaponry to shape a better world. But Karbala and Fatima show that that's a falsity, and they stand in contradiction to that philosophy. So you see, in the end, Fatima is a universal figure, not a particular figure. She belongs in her integrity and her gratitude to the circumference of a wider community. She goes beyond, for me, even the frontiers of what we could call the Abrahamic family. Call it, as one famous Islamic theologian did, call it the community of God's servants, a community that is shaped from the way in which they understand God, the way in which they receive his message, the way in which they worship him, the community of those who pray with hearts that are pure and sincere. And I suggest that in every generation, if we look carefully enough, we'll see that God raises up such individuals always to address a wider family, because the virtues they live by, like integrity and gratitude, are universal human virtues. We need to keep reproposing Fatima for each new generation, no matter who they are, Muslim or non-Muslim, religious or non-religious. For many people, Fatima may end up being the one who gives them some light when all those other lights they've believed in begin to fade. Now, I know this has ended up sounding like a sermon, a bit of a khutbah about Lady Fatima, but we could do worse than listen to a sermon about Lady Fatima, because I think that integrity and gratitude are crucial. They top the list of all the virtues, and we seem in our world to be experiencing a distinct lack of both. And where do we learn those virtues? Not in our mosques or our churches or our synagogues. We don't learn virtues in places of worship. We learn them in the round of daily life, in those difficult moments we experience every day, moments when we could so easily become impatient or angry or vengeful, and then God invites us not to. So that when we pray for virtues like gratitude, when we pray for virtues like patience, all that God does is give us opportunities to practice them. We learn them in the daily round of life. So thank you for this chance to speak about the Lady Fatima, the book that I wrote many years ago now. No, not that many. It needs a second volume, of course, because over the years one finds all kinds of information. So I might eventually, once I have finished with Al-Abbas, I might try to produce a second volume looking at some of the lesser known hadith and history of the Lady Fatima that are not often quoted, and trying to produce a little second volume. So thank you for allowing me to speak to you who know far more about these things than I do, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Father Clohessy. It's indeed quite an intriguing speech, and it's difficult to control your tears whenever you hear about Bibi Fatima Zahra Salamullah. And folks, we are now open for question and answer. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. I request to please be short and precise in your questions, so we give others who have participated an equal chance. So let me go first. I've seen Mr. Ali Kazmi, who has raised his hand. Mr. Ali Kazmi, may I request you to please unmute your mic, and could you please introduce yourself and ask the question? Thank you very much.
Hi, Christopher. How are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. I will have a short introduction of myself to you. My name is Ali Kazmi, and I'm a businessman and live in capital Islamabad. So, and more introduction, I will let you know that I am from the family of Lady Fatima, to whom you written a book. And for me, as a son of Lady Fatima, I'm feeling very proud, and that some author who is from a different religion and different faith, and how he wrote a book with such a covering all the aspects of Lady Fatima life. Well, I did not cover all your speech, your Zoom address, but I joined in the middle of that. So I have a little question in mind. What was the main thing which inspired you to write a book on Lady Fatima?
Oh, thank you. I've been asked that question many times, and it's a very simple answer. I was beginning to do some research on Al-Hussein. I was going to write on Al-Hussein from a Christian theological perspective. And of course, one doesn't ever read about Al-Hussein without encountering the Lady Fatima. And I was really appalled by how little was written on Lady Fatima, considering the amount of devotion to her in the Islamic world, and the Shia Islamic world in particular. That all I could find were small pamphlets and booklets. Of course, there was Ali Shariati, he wrote on her, but even his book is not particularly long and doesn't always have all of the necessary things for an academic work. So I decided to produce, and I think I did produce at that time, which was middle 2000s, I think I did produce the first academic work on Lady Fatima based on Arabic sources only, but in English. And since then, many people have written very good works on her, but I like to think mine was the first, and it was in response to what I thought was a shortage in the market, but more especially that she deserved her own proper biography, something serious, something that would open her life to a Western audience who otherwise may have known nothing about her at all.
Okay. Christopher, many thanks. And I have a little request that if you can come to Pakistan and we can have some like seminar or lecture, and because there will be many people in Pakistan, we will love to see you because I'm really impressed.
Thank
so
you.
I have a little request, if Ali can coordinate with you, or you can accept our request and visit Pakistan.
Certainly.
And we can arrange a big seminar.
I have many friends there. And,
yes, we can arrange a big seminar in your honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali Kazmi, for your kind participation with the comments and an excellent question. So thank you very much. And folks, we are open for other questions. And in the meantime, Father Clohessy, if you allow me, if I may ask you one question, which I'm actually now more intrigued after listening to your keynote. Father, you being a non-Muslim who has written the book on Ahlul Bayt, particularly when talking about Bibi Fatima Zahra Salamullaha, Bibi Zainab Salamullaha, knowing in the Western part of the world, there is a perception about the Islamic patriarchal culture, and here, after your books which have been published, there's a profound impact of these ladies in the Islamic world, and when we say particularly in the Shia Islam, you know, how we highlight all the virtues that you have mentioned, all the sacrifices that you have mentioned, and all the lessons and all the inspirations that we derive and we take from these ladies. Where's the gap? Is it the projection? Is it academic gap? Or what would you advise, or what would you suggest how we create more awareness in the Western world to not sort of tackle, I would say, I wouldn't consider it a propaganda, but I would say there's maybe you know, a better plan or a better awareness, or you know, raising the level of awareness is required. And I think that is where we need to take more important role in terms of writing or curating more genuine content to address the Western world. Yeah.
I suppose in a way, again, this is partly why I wrote on Lady Fatima, but especially also why I then wrote on Lady Zainab, because I thought it a great pity that these two extraordinary women who really dwell within the heart of Shia faith, I mean, in a sense, and I'm always careful how I speak about Lady Zainab, but in a sense, she is the first to preach the Karbala message. She is the first one to speak for her brother. Before any of men do it, she does it. She carries the whole of Karbala, in a sense, with her in those terrible days. And therefore, she is a woman of extraordinary strength, both humanly and spiritually. And I thought it a great pity that she's so unknown. I mean, you know, even Ali, now there's a very excellent new biography of Ali, but heir to the Prophet. But until now, Ali is barely known in the West because no good work exists, no readable, trustworthy academic work. So the one thing we need is scholarship. As I say, bad scholarship needs to be met with good scholarship, not with just criticism. We need seriously good scholarship. I look at the life of the Prophet himself and I wonder, how is it nobody's written a thorough biography of Lady Khadija? Nobody's written a biography of Salama. How is this possible that these women who so influenced his life and were so loved by the Prophet have just been ignored as though they had no influence? But we know from those first hours of revelation the experience that the Prophet had and the one in whose arms he took refuge. We know this, his own wife. She was an extraordinary woman, Lady Khadija, and yet her story remains untold. And I'm getting too old to do all of these people. I can't do them all. I think, for example, Abbas, look at Abbas. Look at how loved he is, how heroic he was, and yet nobody knows anything about him, partly because the sources are very few, but that means you just have to dig. We have to dig, and that's part of what it means to work in the academic world. We have to dig and be able to construct a biography so that this Abbas, who gives his life in a horrible way so that a group of children don't die of thirst, this man can be known in the West. Why shouldn't he be? He is as heroic and as virtuous as any Western hero. Why shouldn't he be known? So I think scholarship is very important. Scholarship destroys ignorance, and prejudice and ignorance, once they are destroyed, change perceptions. And this is very important.
Thank you very much. And that gives us all the reasons to thank you more for doing the academic justice with the history by highlighting and by writing and curating such an excellent content on these figures. Folks, any other questions you have, or allow me to ask another question, Father, if you permit, since we don't have questions from the audience at the moment yet, unless I get some more questions. But let me ask you, Father, you mentioned about two virtues, integrity and gratitude. How, you being a non-Muslim and as a theologian, as a historian, when and you rightly mentioned that we need to look at these personalities even from the human perspective, rather than just normally, as we call, as I know in the last session you very eloquently described the concept of isma. But when it comes to gratitude, and again, looking from the divine perspective, as you mentioned, even Bibi Salma knew about the prophecies about Karbala. And here we have Bibi Fatima Zahra Salamullah, who's the mother of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, Imam Hassan alayhi salam, Bibi Zainab Salamullah. And we know that she also knows about the prophecies, how they will be brutally martyred. Yet her son, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, as we were discussing just before the session was commenced, at the day of Ashura, still prefers to bow down at the right time to declare there's no one greater than God, and implements and executes the time to pray with gratitude. How do you take it?
Well, I take it that there are generations, past generations, whose faith are not going to be repeated in future generations. We live in a different world. We live in a world that is materialistic. But besides materialism, because materialism in itself is not a bad thing. I mean, I think everybody should have a house and a car. And I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's when all of these things become the center of people's lives. And no matter what they've got, it's never enough. All of that destroys gratitude to God for the simple gifts of life. And the people who are able to give thanks to God regularly and intensely for the simple gifts, they are the ones who also have the courage to thank him for the difficult gifts, because there are gifts that God gives that are more difficult because they include demands. The gift of submission to God is indeed a gift, but it's a demanding gift. It's not an easy thing. And people who are able to give God thanks for little things, without overlooking them because they're little things, without despising little things, they are the ones who learn soon enough to be able to thank him also for the difficult times. But again, I have to come back to this central quality of religion. What is religion? Religion is primarily a virtue. It's not an organized thing. In its primary sense, religion is the virtue by which we give to God the justice that he is owed by worshiping him. And therefore, the truth is that if we claim to be religious people, then God has to be first. He has to be above all things. This lukewarm, God on a Friday, or for Christians, God on a Sunday, and then the rest of the week. No, this is no good. Christianity has to be intensely lived. Islam has to be intensely lived. And it's this intense living that causes people like Lady Fatima, Lady Zainab to be such models, not just that they're members of the Ahlul Bayt, but also because the intensity with which they lived what they conceived to be the truth of revelation, the truth from God, That is what causes them to become models. We do live rather lukewarmly. I mean, we believe in God, but the truth is, I sometimes wonder, firstly with me and not with everybody else, you know, is he number one? Is he primary? If he's not primary, then something's wrong, because if he exists, how can he be anything less than that? And I think part of putting God in primary place is that we spend. There was a famous Christian theologian, Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, who was a great medieval theologian, said most of our prayer should just be thanksgiving. He said, don't ask for too many things, just give thanks. God knows what you need. He doesn't have to be told, but he's interested to hear your recognition of the gifts as they arrive. So most of our prayer should be thanksgiving to God. And I've got a favorite little trick that I tell people every night before you go to sleep. Give thanks to God for 10 things, the first 10 things that come into your mind. Make it a habit, because we learn gratitude by practicing gratitude. So it should be a point of order that when I finished my night prayers or my final prayers of the day, before I sleep, there are 10 things that I want to thank God for, whatever those things may be. And little by little, we habituate ourselves to gratitude. Aristotle said, if you want to learn a virtue, you practice it. If you want to be a good pianist, you practice and you become a good pianist. We become virtuous by practicing virtue. And we practice gratitude by practicing it every day in small ways. So I really do think among people of faith, the members of the Abrahamic family especially, we need to see a more intense living in our own private daily lives of faith, not worrying about everybody else. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing, that I am living the faith correctly and not rigidly, but ruggedly, willing to take on whatever God asks of me.
Brilliant. This is quite very, very eloquent. And allow me to just share a comment on the practice, because this is very close to my heart also, being a trainer myself. We normally do say in our sessions that practice makes a man perfect. However, we do argue that no, that's not a right statement. Practice doesn't make you perfect. Practice makes it permanent. Only good practice makes perfect. So absolutely, and what could be more good than practicing virtuous practices? So further, again, just one last question, if you allow me, since let me go through the chat if there's any questions. Obviously, people are writing a lot of good comments, appreciating what you have delivered as a speech today. Coming back to the role of women, and in our traditions, especially in Shia faith, that on Thursdays eves we recite hadith-e-kisa. I'm sure you must have gone through this, the tradition of the veil, or you call the clad,
the cloak,
yeah, cloak, yeah. And it's such a profound narration for me when it comes that despite being Prophet's presence in the whole hadith, but the pivot of introduction is Bibi Fatima Zahra Salam Alaiha. All the introduction in this hadith is done through the mother, through the wife, through the daughters. And as per the tradition, the verse comes in once the whole introduction is done, and that is when the God reveals the verse of purification. But coming back, this is where you said, Abiha, she has such a profound impact. And this whole tradition gives you another virtue, which are the family values, how to introduce, how to do greetings, how to enter in the house, and how to have, this closeness with all the family members as siblings, as daughters, as fathers and mothers. So you smell the fragrance of each other. This is the closeness you're teaching in this whole hadith. I mean, any views on this, Father?
Well, yes. I mean, firstly is I think that in all of these people, all of the core members of the Ahl Bayt, all of the, let's say the awliya, the holy ones, whatever you want to call them, we have to always draw a distinction between what is to be imitated and what is to be admired, because there are some things to which Lady Fatima, Al-Hussein, Al-Hassan were called by God, which were uniquely for them, calls from God. Each of us is called by God to a particular purpose in life, and we don't have to be carbon copies of the next person. Each of us is a unique individual and making up the community. And therefore, we must always be able to draw a careful distinction between something that is for imitation and something that is for admiration and for inspiration. Having said that, because of course there are a whole lot of virtues that belong to Lady Fatima alone that don't belong to other people. We don't all share in the quality of Isma. We're not all, so we have to remember that. But of course, as in the Christian tradition with the family of Jesus and Mary and Joseph, so in the Islamic tradition with the Ahl Bayt, and especially the people under the cloak of the Prophet, I always feel a bit sorry for Salama, who tried to get in as well and was told, no, you have your own place. But nonetheless, it's a beautiful example of family life in the house of the Prophet. And I'll tell you this, that there are a number of beautiful hadith of moments when he is in the family home, having meals with them, moments when Jibreel appears in the middle of a family meal and the Prophet begins to pray. When it's just, Ali and Fatima, Hassan and Hussein and the Prophet, it gathered in this very intimate family setting. So you have there, and this is probably room for another research work, you have there some very strong elements for the importance of certain things in family life, and that is being together. That's very important. Just being together, that families are together. They're not, everybody's out every day doing all that families spend time together. They eat together, because eating is a very serious and intimate bond in a family, that they pray together. These are all simple things, but the family of the Prophet, let's say the Ahl al-Kissa, these people give a very good example of this for us.
Absolutely, and that's where I would re-highlight and reinforce the practice part. As what has been recommended by our elders to keep on reciting this is just to reinforce the practicing of these values of family and bondages. I think this is where the lessons that I derive from. So that really brings us towards the end of the session. Father, I really appreciate your time for considering, again, this is the month of December, the holy month. So I wish you in advance Happy Christmas.
Thank you.
And I know you are quite busy, but as always, you've been very kind enough to extend your support and by sparing the time to deliver this live session with us, which indeed turned out to be quite intriguing and very interactive and very, quite a learning experience for all of us. So once again, thank you very much. Any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Well, just to say, and I'm glad you did remind me, but just to say that once again, we have a great tradition in the Catholic faith of praying for our departed loved ones. And in these times, especially when we've lost so many family, but as last time, so this time too, I do remember to pray for the repose of your soul, of your father and your mother. So Said Riaz Hussein Jaffrey and your mother Saida Iftiab Begum. I do remember to pray for them as I did last time. And I'm glad you reminded me, because this is a very important thing for us as well, to pray for our loved ones and to keep them close to us always.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Father. I'm really overwhelmed to hear this, that you've prayed for my parents. And as you mentioned, we like to conclude this session with the prayers for the health and safety of all humans in this world, especially from this contagious disease that the world is going through, such a trauma at the moment. And we have been losing a lot of loved ones and dear ones. And all of those who have lost their loved ones and dear ones, we pray for the rest in peace, for their souls in the heavenly abode, for their journeys, and for your loved ones, for your whomever who have gone out of this world now.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Father. And thank you all of those who participated in this live session. And I hope you found it useful, interesting. And we would like to conclude this session with another humble request for Father Christopher Clohessy, that please do remember us in your prayers in the Christmas time, and allow us to reach you back for any future such live sessions. As the thirst is always there. I mean, especially with all the content that you're creating with such a scholarly work from the academic perspective for these holy personalities. And we would love to hear more from you in the future, and we'd like to keep you engaged. So thank you.
Certainly, anytime, and we'll keep each other in our prayers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, happy Christmas in advance, and wish you all the best. Thank you very much. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you have dialed in from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much. Thank you, President. Thank you.